I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. So glad you're here. You know, in the ongoing discussions about all the things wrong with the city of Portland, and there are many, there's one group we don't hear from all that often: business owners. In my opinion, those folks, especially the small business owners, they're the ones that glue the city together. They hold everything together. They create jobs and invest money in our city. I think they're incredibly important, really, in any city in America. And tonight, many in Portland's central Eastside, they're angry at how bad conditions have become there. And that's why tonight they are our big story. Last night, something remarkable and unusual happened. Dozens of business owners from the central East Side gathered in the evening to let Portland's mayor, Ted Wheeler, know how they feel about crime and homelessness and neglect from the city. Spoiler alert, they're not happy. As I mentioned earlier, we don't often get to hear from them, so tonight we're going to spend some extra time on all this. Let's begin with their frustrations. Here are two comments from Kyle Ransom. He's the CEO of the company Showers Pass, which makes popular coats for cyclists and others.
We're on Southeast 6th. There was a massive camp right down there underneath 99. It was horrible for 6 months. The city finally came in, swept it. What did they do? They swept it round the corner in front of our building. We now can't even get a delivery into our building. I actually had another instance where this was happening. We were pleading with the city to come and clean it up because I had investors from Asia coming to look to make a multi-million-dollar investment in a new brand that we're launching, Vault, which is e-bikes. The individual arrived from Taiwan and said, yes, we want to invest in your business. We are not investing it in this location because the building was surrounded by homeless camps.
Can you imagine what that was like? Yes, I know our homeless population needs help, and we'll get to that in a bit. But put yourselves in the shoes of a business person trying to make a living in Portland, trying to help their employees make money, and serve the public by making good products. Imagine doing all of that in a place surrounded by homeless camps. Here's another CEO. This is Marcy Landolfo from Rains PDX. That's a clothing company. She's explaining she recently closed one of her stores for good after 15 break-ins. She wants to know if the city can use federal law enforcement to clear out the criminals.
Is that an option? If we can clean out the crime, then we can hopefully focus better on our citizens that need and want the help to get off the streets, that need and want the drug treatments, and separate that out from the outright criminals that have come here to exploit our city, exploit our resources, and mostly exploit the good nature of all of us, because now we're all sick of it. So just wondering if it's an option to just address and clean out the crime on a very public, outward, and visible level, to send, to just send that note. We're not going to tolerate it.
Well, Mayor Ted Wheeler did not answer directly, which actually means no. But he did say that for the first time in a long time, the Portland Police Bureau has hired more officers than it lost this year, bringing 117 officers on board so far. That brought a round of applause in the building. Wheeler also said he's frustrated by low-level criminals not being held accountable.
I'm a huge fan of restorative justice for one time, but if it's 15 times, that needs to be a more severe penalty, in my opinion. And we at the local level don't direct what those penalties are. We don't control the courts, we don't control the prosecutors, we don't control the jail capacity, and ultimately we have to operate within the confines, of course, of the Constitution.
Of course. Another business owner said a vandal snuck into his 6-story building and flooded it with 30,000 gallons of water, and now he has to rebuild. He wants to know about private security.
Is there an opportunity to partner with the city if private equity would come to the table to help with neighborhood watch, professional people? No, you can't recommend them, can't tell us what to do tonight, but I'm willing to sit on a committee, put money in. I brought my checkbook tonight so that we can have eyes on things from 5 p.m. to 2 a.m.
Well, the mayor didn't answer that question directly either. The gathering was organized by something called the Central Eastside Industrial Council. That's a group that's spread over 622 acres of Portland's Central Eastside. It includes 1,400 employers, about 22,000 employees. The executive director told me today that many have pushed the city of Portland to help fight crime and homelessness and drug use for a long time. But last night, it appeared the mayor was finally willing to take action. He promised to launch a 90-day plan to help clean up the area, similar to the plan that took place in the Old Town neighborhood this last spring and summer. That included things like more focused police work with more police patrols. The effort wasn't perfect, but it did help reduce crime and garbage. The city swept several homeless camps there as well. Many business owners worry about the dangers posed by some who live in the camps. Some have mental health issues, some have drug issues, some have both. Another business owner, Angie Garcia, who owns a preschool, raised the issue of involuntary commitments.
We've had violence, we've had staff members chased with machetes. Like, we have had it all for a very, very long time because we are housed right across the street from St. Francis. So all of this, none of this is new to me. One of the things the specific question I have for you today, and it is a difficult question to ask because I am a social worker at heart. It's what I've been trained to do, so I have compassion in my heart. And I also understand as a social worker that sometimes the things that we do are Band-Aids and they do not help. And I think that we have come to this place that we have needed to come to for a very long time, where we cannot allow folks, as Jesse so eloquently put, to live on the streets and think that that's compassion. The mayor of New York City just announced that they are going to be hospitalizing folks involuntarily who are mentally ill. And I'm wondering, at what point do we decide that something similar like that needs to be done? Because hearing that folks are being eaten by rats does not sound compassionate to me at all. And so we have to ask ourselves, at what point do we say that, yes, there are folks who want us not to take these steps, but that we must take these steps?
That issue, involuntary commitment, it's coming up more and more often these days. Our Evan Watson recently did a series of in-depth reports in which experts explained how the pendulum may have swung just a little bit too far. Many now feel it's too hard to force someone with severe mental health issues to get help against their will, even if they're living on the street. Wheeler did answer that question.
You raised the very difficult question of involuntary commitment. And I'm going to be resoundingly excoriated for saying what I'm about to say. But I'm going to go back and base it on my moral and ethical judgment. And this is just personally me, that when I see people walking through the elements without appropriate attire, often naked, they're freezing to death, they're exposed to the elements, they're out of their, I don't even know if they know where they are or who they are. They need help and they need compassion. And I am told by those in the legal system who are engaged with this question of getting people into help, whether it's voluntary or involuntary, the threshold is too high. And so I would support a hard look at the legislative level of our involuntary commitment laws.
That last part, that involuntary commitment, it's not going to happen anytime fast. That would have to come from the state legislature, which will start meeting in about 2 months. But that 90-day plan to help clean up the Central East Side, well, that could get going soon. I'm told there's a meeting this Friday to iron out the details and the timetable. We'll keep an eye on it and let you know how it's going. In the meantime, what do you think about the frustrations of the business leaders or the city's plan for the 90-day reset? Send me your comments, will you? You can email us at thestory@kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail. The phone number is 503-226-5090. I look forward to hearing from you. And while we're staying on the topic of homelessness, today the Portland City Council decided to move forward with the initial funding for Mayor Wheeler's plan to handle the homeless crisis citywide. The vote today earmarks $27 million for the 5-part plan that includes building 6 large city-sanctioned homeless camps. Residents will have access to food and substance abuse treatment, and the camps will have security patrols. The mayor's plan also phases in a ban on unsanctioned camping over 18 months. The money approved today is expected to come in part from the American Rescue Plan and Multnomah County's Joint Office of Homeless Services.
This is not a perfect solution, but it is a solution responsive to the reality that we face. 5-year wait lists for affordable housing, rampant rates of severe mental health and substance abuse, and a lack of availability for treatment, as well as a progressively dangerous and unsanitary set of conditions within unsanctioned camps across our city. The city just simply cannot wait for a perfect solution.
I've heard that from a lot of you. Which leads us to this. We often mention that this show is unlike anything else you're going to find in the Portland market, or really the majority of news markets across the entire country. We're unique, and we take pride in that, and we're a little bit cocky about it too, I know. We appreciate you joining us live or later, maybe when it's more convenient for you. Part of what makes this special, though, is the dialogue between you and me. We love hearing from you. We love reading your ideas, your criticism, all of it. We especially enjoy when you give us a heads up on other news reports that remind you of stories that we've done. It helps move the whole conversation forward, so thank you. And here's an example of that. A viewer named Michael sent this email yesterday about a New York Times article. Pat, this reminded me of an episode you ran a few weeks, maybe months ago, mental illness and the lack of authority to do anything about it. If you didn't see it, I thought you should be made aware of what Mayor Adams is doing in New York City. Well, thank you, Michael. After we read the report, we thought it was certainly worth your time. So here it is, New York City to remove mentally ill people from streets against their will, and then the subheadline. Mayor Eric Adams directed the police and emergency medical workers to take people they deemed too mentally ill to care for themselves to hospitals, even if they posed no threat to others. Now, you heard the owner of the Portland preschool mention this a little bit earlier during our big story. Mayor Adams argues the city has a moral obligation to help people with severe mental illness, even if they don't pose a risk to others. He said, the common misunderstanding persists that we cannot provide involuntary assistance unless the person is violent. Going forward, we will make every effort to assist those who are suffering from mental illness. Here's how it would work, and a reminder, we're talking about New York City here, not Portland. He said first responders will assess people in public spaces on a case-by-case basis to see if that person is able to provide basic needs for themselves, things like food, shelter, health care. If they can't do those things for themselves, or if there is no presence of unawareness or delusional misapprehension of surroundings or delusional misapprehension of physical condition of health, then the first responders would have the grounds to force that person into a hospital to get help. The mayor emphasized the importance of this plan with a quote that we think may remind you of some of the things you see in Portland day in and day out. The man standing all day on the street across from the building he was evicted from 25 years ago, waiting to be let in. The shadow boxer on the street corner in Midtown, mumbling to himself as he jabs at an invisible adversary. The unresponsive man unable to get off the train at the end of the line without assistance from a mobile crisis team. These New Yorkers and hundreds others like them are in urgent need of treatment and often refuse it when offered. The NYPD, EMS staff, and other medical personnel are going to start training immediately in an effort to, quote, ensure compassionate care. Homeless folks with severe mental illness are often discharged in New York from hospitals just a few hours or maybe a few days after their condition improves. Mayor Adams said in his plan now, he'll direct the hospitals to keep those patients until they're stable and only discharge them when there's a workable plan in place to connect them to ongoing care. That sounds like something that we've heard time and again here at home. And it's worth noting, Mayor Eric Adams in New York is a Democrat, but the Times article points out he's using an argument often heard across the aisle, that growing disorder calls for more aggressive measures. They also write that left-leaning advocates in the Big Apple say deploying the police as auxiliary social workers may do more harm than good. Those same advocates have already warned that Mayor Adams' plan will likely face legal challenges, but it's an idea and a story that is certainly worth your time, as we all search for solutions to homelessness and mental illness problems here on the other side of the country. Now, as I mentioned earlier, our own investigative reporter Evan Watson did a full series on this idea of forced care or civil commitment here in Oregon and Washington. You can check out his series. It's called Uncommitted. It's explored with high standards of forced care, and it's worth catching up on if you missed it. Watch it now on KGW YouTube channel or on KGW Plus. That's our streaming app on Roku and Fire TV. And we know you have lots of thoughts about New York City's mayor plan to force people with mental illness into the hospital. I can just sense your support or fierce opposition already, and I'd love to hear what you're thinking about this. Do you think it's a step in the right direction, or maybe a step or several steps too far? Do you think it puts too much strain on an already taxed hospital system? Let us know. Send me an email to thestory@kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail. 503-226-5090.
Up next on The Story, a special species of lamprey here in Oregon, thought to be extinct, appears to be making an unlikely comeback.
Especially in these days with lots of doom and gloom news, it's good to experience firsthand a positive outcome with conservation.
Why humans nearly caused the creature's permanent demise back in the 50s, and the evidence found nowadays showing there's hope for the future. When The Story returns.
One of Oregon's oldest species has made a remarkable recovery after nearly being driven to extinction decades ago. The Miller Lake lamprey. That's a tiny fish that exists only in a small watershed in the southern Oregon Cascades. Well, it has finally returned home. Lamprey have been around for hundreds of millions of years. They were even around long before the dinosaurs. Environmental reporter Cale Williams has our story.
You might be familiar with the Pacific lamprey, the 3-foot-long eel-like fish with a big sucker mouth. But you may be less familiar with the Miller Lake lamprey, a much smaller cousin of the Pacific variety. And that's because, for much of the last 50 years or so, wildlife experts thought they were extinct. As their name suggests, the Miller Lake lamprey exists only in Miller Lake, in the southern Oregon Cascades and its surrounding watershed. In the 1950s, state officials worried the parasitic lamprey were harming trout in the lake, and they began trying to eradicate them, according to Ben Clemens of the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife.
They started putting logs and screens in creeks that went into the lake to prevent the lamprey from spawning.
A few years later, they took it a step further, trying to poison the fish.
They put toxaphene, a highly toxic pesticide, into the lake and its tributaries to eradicate the species.
For decades, it appeared their efforts worked. The Miller Lake lamprey were thought to be extinct. Then, in the 1990s, they were rediscovered in the Klamath Basin. Since then, Clemens and others have been working to return the species to its native lake, capturing lamprey and relocating them to streams above the lake with hopes they would repopulate it. Last summer, a couple members of the team pulled trout from the lake and noticed some familiar-looking wounds.
They pulled up several trout that had fresh lamprey wounds on them. They knew where to look because they were helping, and that's indication that the lamprey are back in the lake.
There's no evidence the lamprey pose any risk to trout or to humans, but they do provide a number of environmental benefits, Clement said. They provide habitat for aquatic insects, they increase aeration in lake beds, and they provide prey for larger fish, birds, and mammals. Those are just a few reasons their return is such a big win.
It's tremendously exciting, and this is happening faster than we anticipated, and especially in these days with lots of doom and gloom news, it's good to experience firsthand a positive outcome with conservation.
Cale Williams, KGW News.
This story is an interesting little case study of human impact on the environment, even if it's just a particular species like the one we're talking about. As we said at the beginning of the story, lamprey have survived hundreds of millions of years of changes here on Earth. And it wasn't until people saw them as a threat that they were nearly wiped out for good. Something to think about. We'd love to hear your thoughts about this. Send an email to thestory@kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090. Still ahead tonight on The Story, it's the final installment of our Wicked West series, exploring the dark folklore of the Pacific Northwest. Tonight, we're talking about a cult in Corvallis, from adultery to murder, how the Brides of Christ came to be, and how the cult met its demise. When The Story returns. The final episode of KGW's podcast, Wicked West, is out today. The series explores some of the Pacific Northwest's dark history and folklore. Episode 6 is about one of the most infamous cults in Oregon, at least for their time. Here's Ashley Korsland with more on how the Brides of Christ Church in Corvallis ripped families apart in the early 1900s.
He started one of the first known cults in Oregon history. His name, Edmund Crefeld. The German immigrant came to Corvallis in the early 1900s, working for the Salvation Army. But in 1903, he formed his own church he called the Brides of Christ Church. It was widely regarded as a cult in town. Still, dozens of women, many of them wealthy, abandoned their families to join Edmund. Some even brought their children with them.
He sees himself as the second coming of Jesus, and they see him as Jesus. Some tell people that he is Jesus, and he stages these elaborate services with chanting and singing and him preaching.
During services, the congregation would roll on the ground, writhing in excitement. This led others to refer to Edmund's followers as the Holy Rollers. Edmund was very charismatic, flashy, and charming, but he was a charlatan and fraud and preyed upon the most vulnerable.
And soon stories develop about Mr. Crefeld being quite the Lothario and taking liberties with many of the women in his congregation.
That did not impress the husbands, fathers, and brothers of the women who joined the Brides of Christ Church. One night, an angry mob tarred and feathered Edmund. He survived.
It does not scare him out of town, and perhaps it also motivates him.
Right after the attack, Edmund married one of his parishioners, Maud Hurt.
And it said that at the wedding, one could smell tar. It was soon after he had been tarred and feathered, and he had perhaps not cleaned himself up enough.
Edmund was also allegedly involved in a romantic relationship with his new bride's mother, Sarah Hurt, and another woman in town too. Adultery was a crime and prosecutable by law, so authorities set out to arrest Edmund. He went on the run, and without their cult leader, the Brides of Christ inevitably split up. Some of the women were sent to insane asylums, and children who didn't have fathers were sent to orphanages. Meanwhile, Edmund did his best to hide from police.
He hides under a house, trying to avoid arrest for the crime of adultery. Eventually is found under Sarah Hurt's house in Corvallis, naked, hiding under the house, trying to avoid capture, is tried for adultery, convicted, and serves a year and a half or so in prison for adultery.
After getting out of prison in 1906, Edmund tried to get the Holy Rollers back together. That sent the community into an uproar.
Again, it's suspected that he has taken liberties with all these women who are part of his congregation.
So the men in town escalated their plans of retaliation. A man whose wife had joined the cult found Edmund hiding out on the Oregon coast. He tried to shoot Edmund, but the gun misfired.
After this incident in Newport, Crefeld is a little more concerned for his life. So he flees Oregon and he heads to Seattle with Maud, his wife.
This is where Edmund's luck ran out. An angry relative of one of Edmund's followers tracked the cult leader down and shot him dead. The vigilante was the older brother of 16-year-old Esther Mitchell, who was rumored to be Edmund's next bride. George Mitchell went on trial for murder, but with a jury that was not sympathetic to Edmund Crefeld, Mitchell was acquitted.
But the story does not end there.
A few days after the trial, Mitchell himself was murdered, shot and killed by his 16-year-old sister, Esther. As punishment, Esther was placed in an asylum, and the Brides of Christ Church was effectively over, closing a chapter on perhaps the most infamous cult in Oregon history.
Holy smokes, what a story. For the full stories, look for the Wicked West podcast wherever you get your podcasts. You can also see photos and learn much more about the series at kgw.com/wickedwest, and you're going to enjoy it. All right, keep sending your questions and comments to thestory@kgw.com. We're going to wrap things up right after this.
Yeah.
The KGW Great Toy Drive is underway, and we want to make it easy for you to give. Head to the kgw.com/toy and click Donate Cash. If you make a donation online, we'll do the shopping for you. And get this, if you give this week, Regents will double your donation amount for double the toys, or you can drop off a new unwrapped toy at any IQ Credit Union, Fred Meyer, or local Toyota dealership. Help bring a little joy to local kids this holiday season. Hey, that's the end of our show. Thanks so much for watching. But remember, the story, our story, well, that never ends. I'm going to take a few days off, but our team has some great stories planned for you tomorrow and Friday. I will see you on Monday.